Hello and welcome to Let's Pod This. Late Wednesday night, the Tulsa World reported that State Superintendent of Public Instruction Joy Hofmeister is running for governor of the state of Oklahoma next year and will be doing so as a Democrat. Her campaign kickoff video was published early Thursday morning, and the issue has, I think, thoroughly dominated Oklahoma's social media for the rest of this week. As the saying goes, though, opinions are like assholes, and everyone has one. That is certainly true about her announcement. We'll discuss our opinions, not our assholes, in just a moment. But first, I'm joined today by our usual crew, Dr. Scott Melson. Hello, sir.
What's up, dude?
And Bailey Perkins-Wright. Hello.
Hello, listeners.
Thanks for being here. I also want to give a special shout out to one of our listeners who might be our youngest listener, I think, Jonah, who listens to this with his mother, who's been on the show in the past. Hi, Jonah. Thanks for listening. And apologies for any profanity you may hear. All right. Well, before we get into our discussion about Joy, we want to highlight a few other notable events that occurred this week in Oklahoma politics and government. I'll start. I was reading on the website for a public affairs software company. They have like a bill tracking software that you can sign up, pay for. It's pretty robust. It's called Quorum. That's the name of the company. It's quorum.us in case you're interested. But they recently released a report summarizing information about state legislatures during 2021. So specifically the bills, right? So they track bills across the country and they looked for trends. And there were some interesting takeaways, I thought, nationally and about Oklahoma specifically. So in general, the larger a state's population, the more bills that their legislature will file. Now, this, I think, at first makes sense. You're like, oh, more people, more bills. But why, right? Like, it's really just one government. It's not a huge correlation. It's like 0.42 or 0.49, so it's not great. Not great, but it's something. There's certainly a few outliers that had huge populations and low bills, or smaller bills or smaller populations and a lot of bills. And there's no correlation between population and the number of bills that are enacted. Oklahoma, for example, has 149 state legislators, right? We've got about just shy of 4 million people. And this year, legislators filed 3,057 bills, of which 582 were enacted. So that averages out for Oklahoma about 20.5 bills per legislator and 3.9 bills enacted per legislator.
And that's interesting because I would say that's actually probably misleading. I shouldn't say that's misleading, and those are in fact the numbers. But I would be curious, and I don't have these sitting in front of me. You break it down by party because the Dems propose and pass. I mean, they propose a lot of bills. Very few get passed because they're such
minority party.
So it's actually probably the number of bills filed is higher. But if you looked at it just the majority, I bet you'd see that it's a higher than average number of bills that are filed and passed, right? Like that the Republicans file more per legislator, right, and more bills per legislator are enacted. I would also be curious to know, out of those 582 bills that are enacted, how many of those are ALEC bills and how many of them were actually written by
and how many of the 3,000 bills were shell bills in the first place, right? Like that inflates it a bit. And certainly not every legislator even files any bills.
Well, and many bills that are passed, too, are from those who are in leadership. So there's probably even a higher ratio for those who have more time in the legislature than those who may be freshmen. So that's interesting.
I would think across the country, some of those same things would be at play, right? So similar occurrences or skewing factors across the country. So that puts Oklahoma at 11th for the 11th highest number of bills per legislator, for what that's worth. Health and education, as far as issues, those were far and away the most popular topic for bills nationwide. I mean, like, of 500% more those than other topics. Oklahoma, and they also studied social media. That's one of the other things that Quorum tracks. Oklahoma State Senator Mary Boren was the most active Oklahoma legislator on social media. She had 3,600 posts on Twitter and Facebook cumulatively, which is, if you guys were to guess, I don't think you have it open, but what do you think the top state legislator in the country, how many how many social media posts do you think they had this year?
50,000.
No, that's too high, but a worthy guess.
Probably about 5,000.
No, higher than that. It's about 20,000. But he almost exclusively did it on Twitter. He's a rabid Twitter user. I think he only had just a few dozen, I think, Facebook posts, and then the other tens of thousands were on Twitter, which makes sense.
And I wonder how many were retweets and how many were threads too, because now that Twitter is allowing people to thread their posts, people can find ways to write their novels in the way that they wrote novels on Facebook. So.
That's right. They broke it out by Twitter and Facebook, and the legislator, I forget what state it was, that had the highest number of Facebook posts had 3,000 Facebook posts. And I was like, that's a lot of Facebook posts.
And I wonder if they even work with somebody to make posts for them, because lawmakers are busy. So, and Andy, you were talking about how health and education were the most popular topics for bills. That makes sense for Oklahoma because, with Medicaid expansion over the past couple of years being such a hot topic with us passing that ballot measure and them trying to figure out how to fund it, and then the debates about whether to do managed care and all of that. That makes sense that it's popular in Oklahoma, but also with education, it's really interesting how we shifted from teacher salary conversations to now school choice conversations and what's happening in the legislature. So it'll be interesting to see going into 2022, because I'm sure education's still going to be a top issue discussed, but what element of education, will be the focal point.
Right. Well, and I think, for 2020, right, and 2021 makes a lot of sense that those would be the highest because we're in a pandemic and schools have been majorly affected. And there's lots of nuances to that and lots of little details.
Oh, yeah. And the pandemic. I forgot about that little thing.
Well, and they broke out COVID separately as well in some of the... Anyway, it's interesting. I will link to the report if you're interested. I actually found a couple of errors on their data table and I emailed them and they were like, oh, you're right. We'll fix that and republish it. So
you're a good person.
I stayed up way too late, emailing strangers about how their data was wrong. That's the kind of person I am.
And another thing.
Yeah. Also this week, we had a couple of ballot measures filed. Did you guys see this? This is just yesterday.
Yeah. So Oklahomans for Responsible Cannabis Action. I'm curious what responsible cannabis action is. They filed 2 initiative petitions this week. One would fully legalize recreational marijuana for anyone age 21 or older. So this would include the growing, buying, transporting, preparing, and consumption of cannabis. It would also double the excise tax on marijuana sales from 7% to 15%. And those monies would be used to fund oversight of the cannabis industry. It would also allow anyone serving time for a marijuana-related conviction to request that conviction would be dismissed, which is interesting because in Oklahoma we have this thing called the single subject rule, which says that I know, and it's questions too, right? Not just legislation.
Oh, it's definitely questions.
Yeah, so you can't have something that does multiple things, right? So a lot of times you'll hear at the national level, there's some must pass bill. And in order, because all the senators and legislators know that we have to pass the defense budget, we're also going to include some other controversial policy in there that's maybe not as popular in order to get people to vote for it. So that's when you do that, particularly if you do it egregiously, it's called log rolling. And in Oklahoma, that is specifically not allowed. So the question here that I have no doubt will come up in court, assuming that these people, Oklahomans for Responsible Cannabis Action, get their signatures, would be to say, hey, yeah, there's a different question, right? Legalizing cannabis is a separate issue from allowing anyone who is serving time for a marijuana-related conviction to request that their conviction be overturned, that should be 2 separate bills. The other one would eliminate the Oklahoma Medical Marijuana Authority and create a standalone agency called the Oklahoma State Cannabis Commission, which would be a cabinet-level agency. They'd have a seat at the government. I don't know why I'm cracking up, but...
Because it's funny.
It would also...
It's bold.
It would remove the cap on the number of cannabis-related business licenses and allow for home delivery of marijuana products. This seems to me like it has not one, or not two, but three subjects. Yeah, lots of weed action. Man, how pissed would some of our friends at the legislature be who have spent like countless hours like building out the Oklahoma Medical Marijuana Authority in the last 2 years? Man, how pissed would they be if there was a question that was just like, no, it's gone.
I think that the second question that would create that has less of a chance, right?
Yeah.
I can see voters, should they make it that far, I can see voters saying, yeah, let's legalize it. That's fine. But I don't think voters are going to approve another state agency, right? Like that's a bad talking point. And also the fact that they have outlined that this agency would get a seat in the governor's cabinet. If that passed, every special interest in town would try to get a seat. Or the pork commission, the peanut commission, right? Like everyone would want a seat on the governor's cabinet. And that's also, I don't know if you can even do that because isn't the cabinet like at the pleasure of the governor? It is. So it's up to the governor to decide who they want because they can create seats and do away with them. So that may be a separation of powers issue that would be unconstitutional even. So we'll see. They just filed this yesterday. There's a couple of weeks before challenges are due. As Scott, as you said, I expect they will receive some.
And I don't know that there would be so much public support in the way that the state question is designed because in the eyes of many folks in the general public, I'm not going to say everyone, but they do see marijuana shops on every corner. And the legislature particularly definitely wouldn't want to take their hand and authority out of the amount of money that's coming in from the marijuana industry, right? And so I can definitely see court challenges and other things related to this campaign because there's already critiques about the design of the state question passed related to medical marijuana. And so from the way that this is written, I can see a lot of scrutiny from different points of view related to. So it'll be interesting to see which entities are even behind this petition. And is this written for a constitution change or a legislative change?
Constitutional change, which means they would have to, collect upwards of 200,000 signatures for both. And doing two questions at the same time is very difficult. It can be done, like 780 and 781, but it is quite difficult.
Yeah, for sure.
So, also earlier this week, Election Board Secretary Paul Zirax sent a letter to state lawmakers, and it's even linked on the Election Board website on the homepage.
This cracked me up because this was not a hey, FYI, this was a strongly worded, I do not have time for this bullshit letter.
Yeah, it's exactly right. Listeners, it'll be linked in the show notes, or just go to the Election Board website. It's right at the top. There's a big banner ad about it. Even there's bold print. There's bold and red and underlined. And it's basically this is all in response to the big lie, allegations by MyPillow CEO Mike Lindell.
Can we not even call them allegations? Can we just call them lies?
Yeah. They're false allegations. They're lies. He basically at some symposium said elections in Oklahoma and elsewhere were, riddled with fraud. And so, Paul Zirax back then was like, that's bullshit. There's no way. And then he's like, but listen, we'll do our due diligence and investigate anyway, which is the good thing to do. Even if you're pissed about it, you got to
But that does take money and resources to do. So
that's exactly right.
It's frustrating.
Yeah. So,
We've not had Paul on this show, but we've had his deputy on this show. Or did we have him on a couple of years ago?
The one when we were driving around.
Yeah, we were driving around election day. That was a great day.
Yeah. That was in 2018. I think we had Paul on the phone. Yeah.
I mean, and we asked questions about that we said that there had been, concerns of, or not concerns. There had been talk of fraud or whatever. And he was like, I am here to let you know and your listeners know that Oklahoma's election system is one of the most secure in the country, if not the world.
Right.
And that is what he said in this letter. And
because it's true.
Damn it, I believe him.
Well, I do too. He's not wrong. And he even referenced in the letter, this is not the only state to debunk the allegations from this website. For example, here's the recent news release from Idaho Secretary of State that is very similar because a pillow guy, has made the allegations just willy-nilly. They're like, well, they found, buckets of ballots behind the zoo and the elephants were eating them. And come on, man. That's not that is as much lunacy as his allegations.
And the state of the country where this has been most contentiously litigated is Arizona. The Arizona State Senate hired a firm that doesn't really exist called Cyber Ninjas to come do a quote-unquote forensic audit. You know what it found? It found that not only did Joe Biden win, he actually won by more votes, right? There was an error in the count, but it was one
not in the direction that people were expecting.
And the CEO of Cyber Ninjas came out and said, "This is." I'd have to go back and find the tweet, and it's been yesterday, so it'd be 1,000 tweets to go through. But he essentially said, he said the principal finding of the audit is that the results of the audited hand recount closely match the election day tally in favor of Joe Biden. And he goes, "This finding is understandably frustrating to some," and it's like, what? It's frustrating that the count was accurate.
Right.
Come on, that.
The will of the people.
Yeah, it gives up the game, right? The point was not to find voter fraud. The point was to try and find some way to say that Joe Biden won, and to say that Donald Trump won, and you can't accurately count the ballots and do that, right? You have to come up with some creative way to disqualify ballots or whatever. So many thanks to Paul Zirax for not entertaining that nonsense here. And I have to say, there have been some legislators who have called for similar audits of Oklahoma's election system. My thanks to the leadership of the Senate and the House for also not entertaining that nonsense.
It's almost going into 2022, and two conversations sadly just won't go away. One, election hacking and, questioning the integrity of our election system, and build the wall. Those two things just don't seem like they're going away anytime soon.
It's true. This week, both our governor and Congresswoman Stephanie Bice down there at the Texas border. Also, it was the guy from Idaho. It was the Idaho governor, right?
Yeah. So the governor of Idaho goes down to the border to inspect the border with Mexico, as is obviously pertinent to the office of the governorship of Idaho. And while he was gone, apparently Idaho, similar to Oklahoma, has a law that says if the governor is outside state lines, the lieutenant governor assumes all the powers of the governor. This is really just supposed to be for emergencies. Hell no, Idaho
took advantage of the opportunity.
Yeah, dude, the Idaho lieutenant governor was like, well, while he's gone, I'm gonna go ahead and order the National Guard to the border. And then what else did she do?
Oh, it was several things.
I mean, some crazy stuff that the governor had to release a statement and be like, she is not acting with the proper authority. I'm going to undo these things as soon as I get back from my press trip to the border.
It's I think it's interesting, and this actually is a good segue into our conversation because
Lieutenant Governor Pinnell, friend of the show, if you're listening, thank you for not behaving like that.
Well, and that's also why I think voters need to know who they're electing for lieutenant governor, right?
Absolutely.
Because you don't want this to happen.
Because it's not like the federal level where the vice president and the president are running as a pair.
Yeah.
You can elect two completely different people as your governor and your lieutenant governor. And so you're right, Andy. It's so important that people pay attention to every single position that they have the ability to vote on.
Yeah. So in Idaho, the governor, this Republican speaker of the House, these are all Republicans, the Republican speaker of the House, and Chief Justice and former Attorney General and former Chief Justice of the state Supreme Court, also Republican. Everyone is saying, we've got to rescue our party from the extremists, right? And it is really interesting to see Republicans around the country. I mean, Idaho is not known as being a bastion of liberalism up there, right? But about folks being like, hang on, you've gone too far. You can't be calling for audits of our election system. You are discounting what we do really well. You can't be ordering troops to go to the border of a state that's 3 states away, right? Like, you don't have this. We gotta just chill the F out and like return to our, cut taxes and freedom roots here. So on that note,
I was going to say, Bailey, you mentioned 2022. The news of the day, major 2022 news. The State Superintendent of Higher Education, Joy Hofmeister, has announced that she is running for governor. There had been a lot of speculation that she was going to run for governor, that she might challenge Kevin Stitt. However, big asterisk, she is doing this as a Democrat. She is changing her party affiliation and running in the Democratic primary instead of the Republican primary. There have been a lot of reactions. There is lots of people have lots of thoughts. So what are our thoughts? Bailey, what are your thoughts?
You're going to have me start. It's an interesting strategy, right? I don't know what the basis was of who decided this approach. Like, were there party officials involved? Were there just establishment elites? Is there a what is the group called? The Lincoln
Project?
The Lincoln Project-esque group of Republicans in Oklahoma that are pushing for some type of effort like this. But it'll be interesting to see how it plays out. I mean, one question I do have is that there was another person on the ballot, right? And so
still is.
And there's, well, absolutely. So, I mean, but just the fact that candidate, former Senator Connie Johnson, has kind of been disregarding the conversation feels kind of strange. And some people feel like she was slighted in this, especially in the way that Democrats have quickly embraced and put out press releases and all this kinds of stuff, welcoming State Superintendent Hofmeister, but not acknowledging in a upfront way the candidate who already announced and was running in that. And so I've heard that feedback as well as a response to the announcement. But her decision to not only run, but run as a Democrat gives her space to fundraise, right? It gives her space to build a campaign, because I think there's 2 or 3 people running in the Republican primary. So it wouldn't have made sense for her to run in the Republican primary because she would have a shorter window of time. But secondly, there's so many factions. So Andy, you were just talking about the divides within the Republican Party between like the far rights and the moderates and other factions within that. It would have been difficult for her to have had an opportunity to come to victory. And so I think there's a lot of people who have all kinds of views about Governor Stitt, right? And so this is an opportunity for her, if she's able to do the strategy right and able to get different groups who may have that frustration mobilized, that there could be a shot. Who knows?
Yeah. So I think her announcement highlights the divisions not only in the Republican Party, but within the Democratic Party as well, right? As both parties to some degree wrestle with identity and the, I will say the liberal and the conservative components therein, right? Like both parties have
the Democratic Party is a big tent party. And so that's been an interesting dialogue that I've heard, as well as, I wish they would support a real Democrat in air quotes, but what does it mean to be a Democrat? And what does it mean to be a Democrat in Oklahoma, especially because there's such a wide range of thoughts and philosophies even within the party. And so this is an interesting dynamic too.
That's right. So let's break this down, and we'll kind of go through why she's running, like why not as a Republican and why not as an independent. And within that, I'm sure we'll discuss why. So we're getting back to the theory of the case for why she's running as a Democrat. So I'll start with why not a Republican, because what you said, Bailey, there's already I can think of two candidates, right? There's Governor Stitt, who's running as the incumbent for re-election, which is inordinately difficult to overcome. Just incumbency is powerful. He is also being primaried from the right by Jackson Laymeyer. Is that his name? No, that's Langford's.
That's Langford's.
Who's the guy running for governor? Somebody else.
Who
Okay.
does someone.
I couldn't find it quick enough. Yeah.
Irvin Yin's, former Senator Irvin Yin's still on the ticket.
Yep. So I was going to say, Stitt's got opponents from the right and from the left of where he sits, perhaps, right? Former Senator Irvin Yin, who is just really upset, I think, about the governor's response to COVID.
And is upset with the governor's response to COVID. He's upset with the governor's stance on vaccines. Mm-hmm. I think he also just doesn't like him. I think Senator Yin is. I haven't talked to him about this, but I think he's probably a pretty big anti managed care, like for sooner care. And some of the other changes that the governor wants to make the healthcare authority. So I think there's any number of reasons Senator/Dr. Yin is not a fan of Governor Stitt.
The other person who declared was Mark Sherwood, who is a naturopathic doctor.
Oh, that's right.
Guy.
He's the guy who's further to the right.
Yeah, he's a
Governor Stitt.
real muscly guy. Intense fella. So you can see in there you've got candidates right, far right, and a little bit towards the middle of right. So there's not really, if you tried to think about where Superintendent Hofmeister is now, right? Like she is, I think, in the eyes of many Oklahomans, a relatively moderate Republican. Now that may be because we don't know a lot about her policies on things besides education, right? But I think she comes across as being affable and all this stuff, right? And she's been supportive of the teacher walkout. Like she was up there walking around meeting with people and doing things that she's not had to have as political of a position as like most politicians we know.
I think she's playing I would call the Joe Biden strategy, right? She's positioning
You're going to sink
herself.
her campaign, Bailey. You're going to sink her campaign.
Well, it feels very like she's playing to the middle. She's using terms like, common sense. Even in her time as, state superintendent of public instruction, you mentioned things about supporting the teacher walkout, supporting increases in teacher pay, protecting public schools, even like the audits going into Epic and other things, right? But even in her campaign ad, she was talking about infrastructure and the need of broadband. She was talking about the need to focus on the health of Oklahomans, right? And so she's trying to stick to those issues that have broader support from the moderates and then the people who are, center left, and then trying to probably catch those independents, because there are a whole lot of independent voters in Oklahoma who have never felt like they fit on the right or the left. And so her approach seems to try to be a catch-all that others can either gravitate to feel like she's more of fresh air than what has been experienced, or to be the candidate that's not Stitt. Right.
So I think the consensus is there's no way she could run and win, or it'd be very unlikely she could beat Stitt in the primary, because primaries tend to bring out the most fervent of the base. And so she would have to somehow appeal to them more than he did. It's not impossible, but still difficult.
Well, I mean, yes. So, I mean, I think the short answer is she's running as a Democrat because she can't win a Republican primary. And I think there's several reasons to think that. One, I would assume, because it seems like she's running a professional operation here, I assume they have polling that shows that they wouldn't beat Stitt in a Republican primary, number one. Number two, anecdotally, look at what happened in the most recent Republican primary we had in a high-profile race here in this part of the state. This is the CD5 congressional primary between Stephanie Bice and Terry Neese. Stephanie Bice, who ran whose reputation as a state legislator was as a moderate. She got in the primary and ran pretty hard to the right. I mean, like full-throated Trumpy in the primary, and still had to go to a runoff to just barely beat Terry Neese, who was badly hurt by some late-breaking, damaging news about her past that came out. So she went full Trump, and Neese got hurt at the end. And we're talking about CD5, which is mostly Oklahoma County, which is the most moderately Republican place in the country, and Stephanie Bice still only barely beat her. So if you take that and you look at the rest of the state, like, she wasn't going to run as anything towards the center and win in the Republican primary.
Scott, and you raise a great point related to that, because we see glimpses of that from the U.S. Senate race with Senator Langford. Like, Senator Langford has had to move further to the right than anything we've seen in his time. I would say, frankly, from Congress even to him taking the position of U.S. Senator, because of how ultra conservative the people who are running against him are, right?
And the other thing that's important to note here is that there are multiple important differences between the Republican and Democratic primaries, but one huge one is that only Republicans can vote in the Republican primary, right? Registered Democrats, registered independents can vote in the Democratic primary, right? So there's a bigger pool of people that you can try to get to vote for you in the Democratic primary than you can in the Republican primary, right? And so that's an important consideration here. You know, a lot of people on Twitter yesterday were like saying the quiet part out loud of like, well, she's changing parties because she can't win as a Republican. She's running as a Democrat because she can't win as a Republican. And it's like, yes, that's true. But also, I mean, just again, kind of looking at this like from the outside looking in, I mean, the point of running for office is to win. So like, I mean, I don't really fault her if she thinks that her best strategy to become governor is to change parties and run as a Democrat.
A Republican,
well,
right?
so this is the thing, right? Because the easy answer, the obvious answer, and I think the true answer is that she's running as a Dem because she can't win as an R. I think a reasonable question that we have to ask, and that she will be asked over and over again in multiple forums, hopefully including here on this show, is, you know, what does it mean to be a Republican and what does it mean to be a Democrat, right? Like, is this solely electoral, or are there fundamental values, principles, and policies that are at play here that are also driving this, right? Is it that I'm still who I am, but the Republican Party has like left me behind? Because I know a lot of Republicans who say that. I know a lot of Democrats who are now Republicans that say that about the Democratic Party, right?
Including her former opponent, right? Who ran against her as a Democrat when she was running for superintendent. She was a Republican. He was a Democrat. They have both switched parties now. She's running for governor. He's running again for superintendent. No one's talking about that.
Right. And I assume that in addition to having, you know, so I think one, she's not going to win the Republican primary. Two, this, you know, so that offers her best course. I assume she also has polling that she can win a Democratic primary, and I assume she also has polling that when you poll the entire electorate, you poll the entire electorate. You poll the entire electorate. That when you poll a representative sample of all voters, I assume she's got polling, hopefully some pretty good polling, showing that she's got a path to victory there as well. So that's both why not as a Republican and why as a Democrat. However, she is going to have to answer questions, right? Like, you know, I think especially to the very, you know, I think in Oklahoma it's relatively small but very active, kind of progressive wing of the party, right? Like, what does it mean to you to be a Democrat, right? Where are you on choice, right? Where are you on, this bill, the running over protesters bill? Is that a bill that you would have signed if you were
the
in the
critical
governor's
race
system?
theory stuff, right?
Where are you on CRT? Can you explain what it is and how it's not really a thing that matters for K-12 education? Like, where are you? I assume she's going to get asked, where are you on things like death penalty commutations, like the case of Julius Jones? Like, she's going to have to answer these questions because...
Where are you at on choice? Because
Right.
especially with so much moving, like in the state of Texas and
Right.
other places related to those issues, you're right. Like, there's going to be a lot of tough questions for her.
she's gonna have to have good answers. And the key is, I was just before we got on the show. I don't know if you guys... I don't know if you guys start your Friday mornings looking at voter registration statistics in Oklahoma, but that's what real political hacks do, right?
Nerd.
Not really, right?
Nerd.
If you look at the September 2021 voter registration statistics, as of last month in Oklahoma, we have 1,112,000 and change registered Republicans. We have 698,000 registered Democrats.
Drop below 700, huh?
It's a huge registration advantage for ours. Now, not all those people are going to vote, right? But not only does she have to get out of the Democratic primary, she has to get out of the Democratic primary while also making sure that a lot of the Republicans who voted for her the first time are going to come home and vote for her the second time.
Right.
Because what we haven't talked about yet on the show is that the only time, Kevin Stitt and Joy Hofmeister were on the same ballot, she got 40,000 more votes-ish, 43,000 I think. She got 43,000 more votes than he did. So there's a bunch of people who voted for her and didn't vote for him.
Which is unusual because the governor on the gubernatorial election years is the top ticket race, and usually you have a roll off, right? A decrease the number of people who cast votes the further down the ballot you get, and so
but I think there's also some contextual things too with that, because I think those were also votes to get her predecessor out.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, not last time though, was it?
The time where those two were on the ballot.
Well,
in 2018,
her first time on the ballot was 2014.
Oh, okay.
Right.
So that's
and that was to get, was that Barisi? To get Barisi? Yeah, no one liked her. Well, not enough people liked her, right?
Sure.
And then, in 2018, Joy came and did the...
she did the election night show.
She did the
she
top
was great.
10 list.
She did the top 10. It was like a Leno situation.
I forgot about that.
She was a natural.
Well, and there's one point that I want to lift before we move on, because you mentioned it, Scott, related to the Democratic primary. We can't treat it as if it's just going to be a drop in the bucket, right? Because it is going to be tough, because she's going to have to prove to a lot of folks of why are you deserving of a Democrat's vote, especially when you're running against someone like Connie Johnson, who's been firm on her stances and beliefs every time she's run, right? And so it's not going to just be, a blowout. It could be tough, especially if the progressive wing activates.
Yeah, I was going to say the exact same thing. We talked about that she was unlikely to be, we'll say, Republican enough to win the Republican primary. And so it is not a foregone conclusion that she would be Democratic enough to win the Democratic primary. And so then people would ask, well, why didn't she run as an independent? And that's because the independent has no primary. You're automatically on the general election, but you lose the structural advantage that is given to both parties by straight ticket voting and by party allegiance, right? It is exceedingly difficult for an independent to win any race in Oklahoma, especially a statewide race. I think she would have the best chance because she has the name recognition, but there's a lot of folks,
resources, right, for people to knock doors and parties
right.
to
No
be
party
behind
infrastructure.
someone
Yep.
and
There's going to be there. I mean, here, yeah. So yes, it is not at all a foregone conclusion that she wins the Democratic primary. I think she will, and I think she should be favored to win it at the outset. She's going to have an advantage in name recognition, an advantage in organization, and an advantage in money, which is maybe the most important thing. She's also going to have, and this pisses off the progressives. I'm not commenting whether it's good or bad. I'm just saying there are a lot of the quote-unquote like Democratic elites who are excited to see Joy Hofmeister in the race because they think she can win and they don't think Senator Johnson can, right? Like that is the fact of the matter. And I think, the question in the primary is going to be how many of those people feel strongly enough about it to show up and vote in the primary, right? If the primary is a race about who's the most progressive Democrat, then it's real tough for Joy. If the primary is a race about who do we think can win the general election and be the governor of Oklahoma, then it's I'm not going to say it's a drop in the bucket, but it's a much more competitive race.
Well, that's the answer to the question, right?
It's a much better.
But is that
race
how
for Joy.
voters show up to the polls, though? Especially when you're looking at the makeup of Democratic voters. There was a lot of frustration after the Democratic primary, particularly Bernie voters, right? Because there was a significant number of Bernie voters who showed up from Oklahoma in that election cycle. And then when Bernie didn't advance, a lot of them said, I'm taking my bucket, I'm sitting back, right?
Yeah, because Bernie won Oklahoma in 2016.
In 16, but Biden won Oklahoma in this time by quite a lot. And the last time Senator Johnson, the last time she was on the ballot in the Democratic primary in 2018, so it was her and Drew Edmondson, she got 38% of the vote. Against Drew. Drew won 62-38. So the last time so it wasn't particularly close. Now, Edmondson, obviously, lifelong Democrat, so that's a huge difference. Lifelong Democrat, former state attorney general, but also someone with statewide name recognition, also someone who has previously won statewide elected office, and Senator Johnson shouldn't fare that well. And this was obviously between 16 and 20. Senator Johnson is definitely of Edmondson and Johnson. She's definitely the more progressive candidate. But I think the Democratic Party has even changed a lot in the last 2 years, or the last 4 years since 2018. So,
and I also want to throw out a name we haven't discussed or I haven't seen discussed recently in this discourse. The Tiger King. Oh man, somebody just did a tattoo of him the other day. I think it was Viking Ashley at Keepsake Tattoo. Just did someone wanted a Tiger King tattoo. Good for them. No, Mick Cornett, right? Former mayor of Oklahoma City, longtime mayor of Oklahoma City, who was widely viewed as a very reasonable Republican, and he ran for governor 4 years ago. And
bullshit.
Yeah, really tried some late attacks that many of us thought were humorous. My grandma did not, and apparently a lot of other older voters did not. And so Mayor Mick in that race had to run and become more conservative and be more Trumpy-ish. I guess that was still the term back then. And did not win, right? And so I think...
But he also had the city factor, and
that's
that
true.
Does not resonate with a lot of rural voters.
Can we talk about Joy's launch video, her ad? Because I wish I could have made a rubric to score it on here's the 10 things you need to have in a campaign ad. And she had it's farmland, pothole. Yeah. She talked about education, healthcare, infrastructure, those.
Well, she tried to be relatable to the regular person, especially the stats that she gave about how many cars she's gone through and parts that have broken down because she's spent so much time on the roads that it was it reminded me a lot of Todd Lamb's 77 for 77, because one of his shining talking points when he ran for governor was, I've been to all 77 counties a few times, right? And so that gave me a sense of, not only am I trying to connect to feel like the average Oklahoman, but I've been on your doorsteps, and I got 4 kids, and all my kids live here too, right? And so I feel like she was really trying to be relatable.
And she did the interview with the Tulsa World, not with the Oklahoman. That was, I assume, strategic, right? That's because that's Stitt's home turf, and you've got to kind of hit from there. Also, that was a tremendous interview that just aired like a free commercial. It was well done. I'm sure it's beneficial to the world as well, but it was a real interesting.
Also, they hate Stitt.
The Tulsa World, they've been pretty frustrated, right? Yeah. And, Tulsa Public Schools, right? Has been pretty at odds with the governor. And so for her to kind of, it's just those little things that are a gentle nod that pick up, 50 or 200 voters here and 50 or 200 voters there that make people take notice. Now we got a long a long road to the election.
Yeah, and I think it's safe to say that there's just so many factors at play to whether Senator Johnson or Superintendent Hofmeister, will be successful in this primary. But if Superintendent Hofmeister makes it through the primary, it's also going to factor in of her ability to mobilize these different factions. Can she mobilize in rural Oklahoma? Can she mobilize the teachers from across the state? Can she mobilize tribal citizens who participate in Oklahoma's election cycle? Can she mobilize Black and brown communities, right? Because at the end of the day, all of those things will have to be at play in order to get to the finish line. And if it's Senator Johnson, she's going to have the same requirements in order to beat the incumbent Governor Stitt, because we've talked about it on the pod. There's been a lot of things over time where he's gotten into tits with different groups, right? And so it's going to, can Senator Johnson appeal to rural Oklahoma? Can Senator Johnson mobilize teachers, Black and brown communities? Can she mobilize tribal nations to really get out there enough to overturn this election? And so all of those things will be interesting to watch over the next year.
Yeah, that's exactly right. I mean, when you start really thinking about the theory of the case for any of these candidates, right, running against the incumbent, we kind of know what Stitt's theory of the case is. But for Hofmeister, for Senator Johnson, for Senator Yin, for the other guy, I mean, all of them, you have to kind of think about how do they build the biggest coalition possible, because now I think the general election, as we've got 3 on one side, 2 on the other. There's a libertarian candidate, Natalie Bruno, right? Like there's
of course there is.
I know Scott's not a fan of libertarians, but and it's still early. We may still see other candidates announce that could broaden the field and divide votes. And I personally love a race that gives me some indigestion about who I want to support the most. And I wish we had an electoral system that allowed me to rank my candidates, but we don't.
I mean, I just, it is interesting. I think that the thing that, not the only thing, but just one thing that I've just been thinking a lot, watching the Twitter. I did a lot of Twitter stalking yesterday. I didn't say very much. But people say, well, what does she think she's doing? This doesn't make any sense. Yada yada yada. Look, I mean, I don't know Joy personally. We've chatted a handful of times, but like, she's sharp. She's pretty sharp. She's a very smart person. This is not her first foray into statewide politics, and also, a lot of respect for people who run like run in local school board races or whatever. But running for governor is not like running for school board, right? This is not a decision that you undertake lightly. This is a major undertaking. This upends your life, your whole family's life. And I'm not saying she's going to win. I'm not saying, I don't know what's going to happen. I think she has an uphill battle. She would have had an uphill battle in the Republican primary. She's got an uphill battle now.
Because it's easy to talk just about education, but now when you have to talk about all the things and have good, strong answers that really convince people to turn out, that's a little bit more difficult.
But and I also know that everybody's like, well, the polls are wrong. The polls are not always wrong. The polls are still pretty accurate. And I'm just telling you, she wouldn't be running if she didn't have polling showing that there was a path to victory.
Speaking of polling, while we sit here recording, Amber Integrated has released newest polling data.
Intriguing.
Ooh.
And this is like the second episode in a row or third that we've had breaking
news.
So I don't see anything about her yet, because obviously this poll was conducted before she announced, although they could have polled it anyway. But on this poll, Governor Stitt's approval rating had declined from 59% in June to just 50% in October, with 38% now disapproving. So that's net 12 positive, right?
Yeah. But that means a bunch of people didn't have an opinion.
That's true. Yeah.
Right.
And then
that's total approve and disapprove, or that's just like strongly or whatever.
I'm just looking at the top line. I'll look in the crosstabs later. I'm sure we'll dive into this. Langford also up pretty heavily over Laymeyer.
Pastor Laymeyer.
Yeah, and Senator Dom for that. 62% of
I
Republicans.
forgot about that guy.
Say
I thought we were going to go a whole episode and not talk about Nathan Dom.
We're not talking about him. We're just saying he's only got 3% of the. Well, that's really bad. Interesting. So we'll dive into this. Maybe we can talk about polling next week on our next episode. All right. Well, you guys, this has been a good episode. I'm sure we will hit the stop button and then still keep talking about it. Listeners, if you'd like to join the conversation, please follow us on Twitter at Let's Fix This OK.
I'm excited, y'all.
I can tell.
I'm excited. No, because this is like something. I mean, it's just nice. One, I mean, you guys know I love election season, but it's just nice, like that we're gonna have something I think to talk about other than just like.
I feel like it's gonna be a blowout.
All right, what bullshit did they do this week?
Yeah.
You know, I mean, we'll still have that conversation, but
yeah, it is fun. I think election seasons are really when we hit our stride on the show.
And hopefully over time, we'll be able to talk about people who are running for other offices that are available. So that'll make the mix even more interesting beyond just the governor and the U.S. Senate race.
In 2018, we interviewed, I think, every candidate for the statewide elected offices.
we did not interview Kevin Stitt.
That's right.
I think we got
except for the governor. Yeah,
I think we got everybody but him.
And we helped host all those debates. That was fun. All right.
The governor has an open invite to come on the show, by the way.
Sure. Yeah. All right, Scott, thanks for being here.
Wouldn't miss it.
Bailey, thanks for being here.
Thank you, Andy.
Listeners, thank you for being here as well. Please rate and subscribe the podcast if you haven't done so already. That really means a lot to us. That sounds silly, but it's true. Please also tell a friend who's interested in this. Maybe they've seen the news about Joy and they want to hear some folks debate it on a podcast. For whatever reason, we could be that podcast. And enjoy the cooler weather. Start preparing for spooky season. And remember that decisions are made by those who show up. Have a good week.